Welcome back. We're going to draw this cast of Caligula from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Caligula was a Roman emperor. This was done in around the year 30. Caligula had kind of a bad reputation, but I don't know the details. So this is similar to the pose we did last time. We're looking up a little at his head, and his head is slightly turned. It's got less turn than we saw last time. So we are going to start with a cranium that is almost a circle. It's basically a circle. Because we are not seeing the back of his head at all. You see how the ear projects all the way out to the edge of the head? So sketch a light circle, and like the one we did last time, I would say the eyes are slightly above center, but not as much. You see that? This is just a tiny bit shorter than this. Again, because the head is tipped up just a little. Let's go ahead and draw sort of general shape of the face. And see how I'm connecting the jaw near the back of the cranium? And then I'm going to do the eye line, which is horizontal this time. There's no tilt to it, and we're going to put that just a little above center. Some artists like to draw a midline like this, like to sort of conceptualize right from the start the turn of the head. That's going to run through the bridge of the nose. Let's do that to show that we understand right from the start that the head is turning slightly to our right, his left. And we're going to put a brow line above the eye line. That would be here. Here's the bottom of the chin, and I'm going to measure, this is the one thing we're going to measure every time is the length of the nose. You can measure it for yourself. It's a little bit so it's a little below center. Remember, the nose, bottom of the nose is usually centered between the brow line and the bottom of the chin. His is a little bit below the center, that's going to work out fine for me because I correctly estimated the size of the jaw. And if I measure this, see how this is a little shorter than this? I'm going to say that, you tell me if you agree, but I'm going to say that he has a little bit of a long nose, but he also has sort of a small jaw. I'm not sure he's a fully grown man. He looks like he might be 14 years old. I don't know. Yeah, so it's a kind of an immature face, so that's where we're getting this asymmetry. Remember, usually we have half and half. Nose is a little bit longer here. There are artists who measure everything. I just take a few measurements to avoid really gross errors. I make a lot of small errors that sort of, I like my drawings to have a little bit of personality and not be photorealistic. And I'm not just making excuses for myself. I actually do value a sort of personal style, which is always in tension with photographic reality. So we're going to put this head on a neck. Neck starts right behind the jaw on this side and to the right of the chin on this side. And look at the line of the trapezius here. It's useful to look at where it intersects, and that'll help you place it correctly. Most people make necks way too long. So, and then if we extend the line of the shoulder on this side, we can see that it ends up angling towards that point. And we're going to put the ear in sooner rather than later this time. Notice that the bottom of the ear is just a little below the bottom of the nose, and that's because his head is tipped up a little. So there's the bottom of the earlobe. And the top of the ear is just a little below the top of the eye. It hits the center, it hits the eye line. So the ear ends up being here. And to give a sense of the upward gaze, we have to include this surface here. This is the surface between the chin and the beginning of the neck. The underside of the throat is very important to account for. And it can actually be misleading to have the chin end in like a hard outline here. I'm going to soften that just to show that we're looking up. And I'm going to do something similar, just like I did last time for the nose. I'm going to indicate a little bit of the bottom surface of the nose just to show that we're looking up at that. Yeah, I think it's focused. And normally the mouth is a third of the way down from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. This is a little less than that. He has a very short philtrum. So I'm just going to just really try to copy the marks I'm making. Don't be more definite than I'm being. See how I'm just indicating these placements with little fragments of shadow? And I'm going to do a little piece of shadow inside the eye socket to define this. I'm defining all the downward facing planes with shadow right now. Without nailing any details down. And I'm also going to do a first shading on, well, I'm going to go ahead and shadow map this side of the face. And the biggest change from my intro class to my advanced class is we are starting to shade before we commit to placements. I find that's really useful because the volume starts to emerge before you have committed to any placements of features. I'm going to even include the volume of the cranium up to the hair. And for those of you who are new here, I'm left-handed, so I'm going to do, this is called first shading. I'm going to do it this direction, but if you're right-handed, you want to be doing it this direction. So just fill this in, including the underside of the throat, including this cast shadow under the neck. And what we end up with isn't detailed, it isn't necessarily that accurate, but it starts to give our brains a sense that we're looking at a three-dimensional volume. And our brains are going to make much better choices moving forward if we create that illusion. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit with the hairline, and then I'm going to come around and check everyone and give you a few minutes to catch up. Okay, we're gonna take one more measurement just so everyone can check their work. We go from the center of the bridge of the nose to the right, to the edge of the face on the right. And we do the same thing, and we go to the back of the cranium. We can see, I'm going to measure my screen, and you can do the same thing. Yeah, it's very close to being a 2-to-1 relationship. Can you see that? Like if I subdivide this in half, we have pretty much 3 equal units. That's that fractional thinking that I'm always talking about. So check your own work. Check to make sure that this distance here is about half the size of this distance. So we're going to go here to here. That gets us to the outside of this eye. This gets us to the back of the skull. And we should have 3 equal spaces. So just double check your work. Make sure that things are breaking down that way. And now we're going to go into a little more detail. So let me clean this up and zoom in a little. So we've located the bridge of the nose. I already started to indicate this little shadow around the eye. We're going to resist the temptation to just draw a hard outline for the eye. We're going to just try to draw these shadow shapes. So we've got a little shadow under the eyelid that curves around and defines the upper margin of the white of the eye. You see that? And we have a secondary shadow above that that defines the crease under the, some artists call the sausage. That's this kind of rounded form that runs above the eyeball, inside the eye socket. And a little triangle of shadow between the eyelid and the eyebrow. One advantage of drawing casts, this is an actual marble, but a lot of art schools used to be provided with a lot of plaster casts of antique sculpture, which is not an original sculpture, but copy, but drawing it is just as good. one of the advantages is there's no local color. The only variations in value and how light and dark things get come from the effect of light and shade. So if you're learning how to draw, it really simplifies things. That eye is looking a little big to me, but I think he has kind of big eyes. That's partly the youthful appearance, kind of a slightly large eyes and slightly small jaw. It's giving him a slightly juvenile look. Having said that, I am running maybe a little short on space at the outside corner here, but I'm just going to go with it. Okay, here's a little definition to the cheekbone. So at this point, I guess I'll do the other eye first, and then we'll do the nose. We can check the size of the eye by, it's always useful to compare the width of an eye to the width of the space between the eyes. And we can see that these spaces are almost the same. So you can really only fit one eye between his eyes, which is another indicator that his eyes are fairly large. So however wide we made this, we want to allow about an equal amount of space for this interval, and then we're going to start defining the shadow under the lid on this side. And remember that this eye spacing intervals end right here where we marked this into thirds. So here's that shadow above the eyelid on this side, transitioning into the this little dagger-shaped eyebrow that follows pretty close to this line that we indicated earlier for placement. Another great thing about casts is, like, everyone knows how to draw spheres, but few beginners, when they draw eyes, really think of the eyeball as a sphere because the iris is so distracting, the iris and the pupil. But here we can clearly see this shadow on the side of the eyeball. You see it on living people too, but as I said, people tend to overlook it because the iris is so distracting. And I'm going to continue to emphasize how important it is to show this little interval between the white of the eye and the shadow under the lash line. And that's another great thing about a cast or a sculpture is there aren't any eyelashes to distract us, so we're really understanding all these forms as intersecting planes without all the distraction of local color details. Don't forget to change up, don't shade exactly like I am if you're right-handed. You should be doing most of your we're still doing first shading here, and you should mostly be going the other direction. Okay. So we have a pretty good sense of where the nose ends. We don't yet have a sense of how wide it is. So I'm going to pull verticals up from the outside of the nostril here, and see we end up about a third of the way into this eye. So I'm going to mark that position, and I'm going to go straight up from here, and we end up at the corner of this eye. So our nose is going to sort of fit inside this little box. But notice that the tip of the nose is not centered on this box because the nose is turned. Tip of the nose is really almost 2/3 of the way over, so it's going to be about here. And this nostril is going to be very foreshortened, like that. And this nostril is more or less facing us, so it's much broader. Sort of like this. My annotations are kind of screwing me up though, because this nostril does not actually intersect the tip of the nose. It ends above it, like that. And then the olive form is going to come right out to this line that we drew, like this. And his nose is just a little bit bulbous, is the word. It's sort of has a little bit of swelling at the tip, and then it narrows as this contour goes up towards the bridge of the nose, which we already located. This is one of those situations where we have light hitting the nose directly and the cheek behind the nose, so we want to indicate this with a very faint outline. Do not make that too dark. And I'm going to do just a little fine tuning. Sort of like, it's something like that. It's hard to assess your work on a nose until you've shadow mapped and shaded it, which I should probably hurry up and do. We're going to shadow map the tip of the nose like this, and the cast shadow under the nose like this. And for first shading, remember we're always going to treat this as one shadow shape, not two. So we're just going to go over the whole thing like that. Okay, so now that we've done this shadow, we have a better idea of where the philtrum lies. It's always a good idea to sort of imagine the root of the philtrum, which is going to be in where this curving tip curves back. That's where the philtrum is going to start. So it's sort of, philtrum is sort of like here. And the philtrum helps us identify where the center portion of the lip, line between the lips is. It's going to be pretty much centered under the philtrum like that. But again, because of the 3/4 view, this mouth is not symmetrical. You'll notice that the wing on the left is a little bit wider than the wing on the right. So we're going to do this with a little bit of a bolder, longer stroke. And then when we do this side, notice it's a little bit steeper coming down and a little bit shorter. And it's that asymmetry that makes it look like the mouth is turning away from us. I feel like I made this wing just a little bit too high though, so I'm going to just revise that like a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, now we're going to look at what's actually going on here. You're going to be doing self-portraits later this term, and I've noticed that most people don't like to zoom in on their own faces this close, but it's really useful to understand the forms that we're seeing. You just get a much better picture of it if you zoom in, so I'm going to encourage that. Here's a cast shadow that's of the upper lip falling onto the bottom lip. Notice this shadow's a little bit wide right here. Gives him a little bit of a pouty look, like his upper lip is extending out past his bottom lip. And that would be easy to see in a side view, but from the front, the only clue that we have is this disposition of the shadows. And then the upper lip is in shadow, but it's very light shadow because there's a lot of light reflecting off of the bottom lip onto the upper lip. Here's this little piece of shadow under the bottom lip. And a little deepening of the shadow at the corners of the mouth. Definitely all part of his kind of immature look. If we were working on gray paper, we'd be able to show that lovely little highlight at the bottom of the philtrum. We might be able to indicate that a little bit later if we get into halftones. And I'm just going to check this angle from the corner of the mouth to the nose. See, I'm running into a little bit of trouble here. I either made the nose too narrow or nose too wide or the mouth too narrow, and I'm thinking maybe it was the mouth. His mouth's unusually symmetrical for this angle. I think, again, because his dental arch might be a little bit smaller than it would be in a more mature face. So that's a little better. I might have to tuck this back a little at the same time to get this relationship right. See what I just did? I made a correction in order to get this to be tilting back just a little bit. It's not quite plumb between those 2 points. Alrighty, we're going to get into a little more definition of the jawline now. So from the cheekbone, we angle just slightly in to the angle of the jaw, which is right where we expect it to be. It's down below the corner of the mouth. And then we angle in towards the chin. And let's get rid of the annotation there. And here's where things get really interesting. We want to resist the temptation to make like a hard line here, because and this always confuses people, because every time you look in the mirror, you see a hard outline where your chin overlaps your neck. So every beginners always think like you have to draw a curve there where the chin ends. Notice that in this reference, there is no hard outline anywhere here, because we're looking up under the throat. So we want to define this edge with shading, and I'm still just using my first shading direction to come around here. And don't worry, it's going to look like hair at first. It's going to look like a beard, but don't stop. The more shading you do, the more your eye's going to read it as shadow. And then we're going to do a little more shading under here, and then we're going to go a little darker for the cast shadow. And if you'll remember from any of our lessons on spheres, what we're doing here is creating a reflected light between the core shadow at the edge of the chin and this plane change where the throat transitions to the neck. And now we're going to use some of our sphere shading technique to darken this core shadow with some curved lines, just as if we were shading a sphere, just to show the roundness of this form. And I'm going to put a few curved lines under the throat to show what's happening there. And I'm going to darken the neck with some more curved lines to show that we are hitting a cylindrical kind of form that we're looking down on slightly. So using the shading direction can allow us to give information about our understanding of the form that's not visible from the photograph. Now this core shadow, there seems to be a strong reflected light source coming from the left. Probably photographer put an umbrella or something over there. So the core shadow gets lighter as it comes up around towards the corner of the mouth. We've got a little bit of a darker shadow right here on the edge of the sternocleidomastoidus muscle. And I'm feeling like, I hate when this happens, but when I was looking at all your work, a lot of you are crowding the ear a little bit too close to the features, and I'm just seeing that I did the same thing. So good on you for copying me, but bad on me for crowding my ear a little bit. The beautiful thing, though, is that we haven't drawn the ear yet, so moving it slightly to the left is not going to be, it's just a matter of bumping a couple lines out. And you can see my Caligula looks a little fat, and that is because I need to bring this plane change up a little. I was sort of giving him a double chin, but see what happens if I just bring my dark up a little. I just He just lost like 30 pounds. While we're talking about reflected light, let's just do the tip of the nose also, because there's a beautiful there usually find a lot of beautiful reflected lights around the nose. So I'm going to darken a little bit this cast shadow under the nose, and then do this cross contour shading to darken the core shadow at the tip of the nose, and that's what's really going to make the nose jump forward in our drawings, is that little bit of darkening above the reflected light. The other thing that's making my Caligula look a little fat is that it's got it's just a slight hollowing under the cheekbone that I missed, which is also going to make him look a little leaner. Okay, that's better. So this is a good time to kind of step back, see how we're doing. You can see that my eyeball here is looking a little flat, and that's because like many people, I was a little timid on shading it as dark as it needs to be. See how by making that a little bit darker, it's going to turn a little better. And along this edge, this boundary is so soft that I want to erase my shadow map and do a little shading into that edge to make it look like a very, very soft transition from shadow to light along this whole edge. And before I go any harder on that ear, I'm going to try to account for all the forms between the eye and the ear to make sure I'm still not crowding it. So we've got the hairline up here. We're going to indicate that with a few little dark accents. And then we've got this sideburn, which is just a little bit past this shadow edge here. Indicate that, and then it feels like this ear is now in about the right place. And let me zoom in a little so we can draw its actual forms. So we've got the earlobe disappearing behind the jaw here. And about a third of the way up, we have the tragus. It's a little foreshortened, but you can still make out that form very clearly. We're going to do a U-turn and draw the antitragus. And we're going to start above the tip of the tragus for the helix. We're going to curve up and around. And the helix fades out behind the antitragus. then we're going to go from the antitragus, and we're going to curve around with a soft, it's not a hard overlap, so I'm going to do the same kind of shading I did on the chin to show that the antihelix is disappearing behind the helix like that. And a little shading inside the gap between the tragus and the antitragus, and a little shadow on the front inside of the helix like that. Now, we're just going to pretend he's got an entire ear on his other side. You can see he doesn't, because it got broken off sometime between the year 30 and the year 2025. I'm just going to pretend it's all there, though. Again, because his head is fairly level, it's not angled up to one side or the other. Bottom of the earlobes are going to be the same on both sides, and the top of the helix is going to be the same on both sides. And here's all his hair, probably a little more elevated than I drew it the first time. Might have just a little less chin. Okay. Let's talk about halftones now. No matter where you are in your drawing, just take a minute with me, and we're going to throw in some of the important halftones because they are really defining some of the plane changes here. Remember to use a very, very light pressure when you draw halftones, but we're going to put one under this eye socket. And even along the bottom edge of this eyeball to define the lower eyelid there. And the most important one, though, is probably along the side of the nose. Very light pressure, but just enough to define this side plane of the nose going into the, it kind of terminates at the eye socket here. The tough thing about this motif in this light source is that there's so much reflected light filling this shadow that the halftones and the shadow are not that different, which makes it a little hard to read. There's a skinny halftone on this side of the nose, and these two come pretty close together, defining this highlight. And there's a little halftone above the shadow on the tip of the nose. And there's a halftone on this, the plane of the temple that's turning away from us. And this plane above it of the hair. And there's a large halftone above the chin and below the lower lip, which I realize I put this shadow too low. He's got a little tiny lower lip. You see that? So I'm going to bring this shadow up a little and then define the halftone around it. He looks a lot less majestic in my drawing than in the sculpture. When we draw eyebrows, we rarely think of them casting shadows, but you'll see that in this sculpture, you can appreciate just how they do project. The hair does project off the face and create a shadow. There's obviously no hairs represented, but we can see this shadow form, which is kind of interesting. So you'll notice when I'm trying to unify this shadow area, so I'm going back to my first shading direction to pull an area together. That's typically what I do. And the final step for me is usually to go, it's a good idea to sharpen the pencil and look for the areas where the shadows are really sharp, the shadow edges are sharp, and just try to tighten your drawing up a little. Like this contour between the lips is really important to make that sharp enough and dark enough. Okay. I'm starting to feel like it's feeling a little more like the guy here. Okay, so people, one way to learn how to draw hair, which people always seem interested in learning how to do, is draw the hair in a sculpture. Because if you think it's hard to draw hair, imagine sculpting it. The sculptor has to simplify the hair. So I'm gonna draw these little dark accents, and then I'm gonna shade a few of them to get a sense of the relief. So I'm just starting out by treating them as lines. And then notice I'm going to crosshatch over them, and that's going to turn each one into a little divot, or a little, it's going to read as a three-dimensional, a groove in the form. See how that works? Very simple, but by cross-hatching, I'm showing an understanding that each one of these little grooves is etched into the marble. And I can use an eraser and just lift out a little highlight on the right-hand side of some of these forms. Probably would have been better with an eraser cap. And hair is like water, or, you know, ocean waves, foliage. You just want to study its movement, but not get lost in like trying to copy individual details exactly. You'll just drive yourself crazy. So I'm just trying to show the general movement of the pattern. Okay, and we're getting towards the edge here. I'm just defining these clumps of hair, and then I'm going to go back and do what I showed you before. I'm going to do a little shading along the edges of them to show that these forms aren't grooves, these are sort of relief forms, so they have a little bit of cast shadow underneath each one. And that's how we create a kind of effect of hair. People who've done a lot of cast drawing, you can tell when they start to draw hair, they really understand it much better in terms of clumps of hair versus individual hairs, which is actually a lot more of a naturalistic way to approach hair. Beginners always just try to draw one hair at a time, as if you could just make a lot of lines, a lot of individual lines, and give the effect of human hair, and that always fails terribly, so you want to avoid that. And now that I've brought out some of the details on the hair, I seem to have lost a little sense of just how much darker it is over on this side. So I'm going to go back, like I was saying, unify that area with some first shading again. I'm going to unify my ear with first shading direction. There's a little bit of hair coming behind the neck, which I don't think I noticed before, so my neck ended up being a little too thick. And I'm going to do a little correction on this nostril, which is just, his nose projects in a weird way, but not quite as weird as I was drawing it. So that feels a little better. And the final step on any drawing is just kind of squint your eyes and look at your drawing, look at the reference, and just check your value relationships. Make sure your darkest darks in your drawing are popping forward the same as they're popping forward in the motif. So I'm going back in and just emphasizing a few of my darks. You're really trying to read the drawing as a pattern of darks on the page, and at this point you're not changing anything, you're just trying to recreate that pattern. And the closer you get, the more the differences are going to jump out at you. So it gets easier to see what you've done wrong. The more you do right, the easier it is to see what you've done wrong. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. So I'm going to say goodbye to the people at home. We'll see you next time.